sun.
I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Listen to Pavarotti. Can I be your superhero?
Hello, welcome to The Revealing. I'm your host Pavarotti, and I'm here to discuss the Idaho 4 case. And I've been away for a couple of days from making videos. I haven't been away from the case though. I've been enthralled in some particular aspects of this case, and I'll talk more about that as we get into this video. But one thing that was very apparent to me, and I kind of thought this, and that's why I let you as members in on the fact that I found a lot of the information before I ever disclosed it to the world. And, and I would disclose it to y'all and y'all get it. And I said that I'm going to be very cautious about how I put that out there. One, because it's very dangerous what I'm doing, but also because I didn't know how people would react to it or if they would even get it. So when I did put it out there, I put it out in the video that I did, what was it, Saturday or Sunday? The one I titled The Untold Story, IDAHO 4. And I didn't just put it out the way I put it out to y'all. I put it out with a lot of other stories around it so that you would have to really pay close attention to even be able to catch the bombshells in there. And then I looked at I can look at the analytics on all the videos, and it shows how many people start out watching it and how many people actually finish it. Well, that video started getting a lot of views, and only about 30% of the people that started watching it actually seen it to the end. So really only about 10,000 people actually seen where Slocum and Gill were in the funeral for Mauitch down in Lewiston. Only a small fraction of those people actually seen the car at the end and me covering the Jackson Schneider connection to everything. And I even watch, what's the guy's name? Outcast. A lot of times when I put videos out, I don't even watch them anymore. I just wait and I'll watch Outcast at night because he pretty much plays all my videos on his channel. And I wanted to really see their reaction to that one once it got to that information. And I tell you what, I almost pulled my hair out. He watched the entire video in literally about 10 seconds before I get to the part where I'm showing Gill and Slocum and Gregory Beers at Mauitch's funeral. He cuts it off and he goes to the end and he starts looking at the little light that flashes on Linda Lane. Didn't watch the funeral, didn't watch the Jackson Snyder connection, didn't watch any of it. And I went, man, that's what everybody out there other than, people that really follow me are doing. They're watching it up to a certain point and then they're missing that. So I knew that the reaction to it though was likely to be mixed. Come Monday, I could tell the reaction just by other people's videos that, they didn't really understand it, or they had birds in their ear telling them to try to fight it in a way. And then later on that day, I went to a super minion, Gray Hughes, and I wanted to see what he had to say and see if the little birdies made it all the way to Gray Hughes. And sure enough, he started his video out with, in fact, I think he called that video the nut burgers or something. And he started that video out really spilling the beans. He said he was contacted either that morning or the day before by some of the victims' families, and they wanted them to really go out and attack these pro-burger channels. So the reaction that it had was the reaction that I expected it to have, especially as it related to the Gonzalez family, because that's the ones that talks to to Gray Hughes. And he apparently got on the phone and called Gray Hughes and asked him to do his best to start attacking us for the content. And he kind of made it his mission in that video and then followed up with another video. Now I can tell you, he attacked Jules. He was very harsh on Jules, and he attacked Harsh Reality, and he didn't have some very kind words about me, but he still threw in a few. What he was hoping would happen, though, was that I would take the bait and I would try to focus on going to war with him. Instead, what I did was I put out a couple of quick videos where I wanted to stir the pot a little bit and just see the reaction in my comment section and see if something might happen that I would expect to happen, because I've been doing this for long enough now to know that there are external forces at work in some situations. So sure enough, as I'm looking at my comments, I see these people that I've never seen before come into my comments, but they're not making comments on the video. They're getting in the comment chains and they're acting like they're part of the group and they're stirring the pot. And there was a bunch of them and they were stirring the pot pretty good. So when I looked at that, I went, uh-oh, they're on full blown attack mode. So I'm just going to step out for a couple of days and let other people that, they want to feel some heat, feel the heat. And I tell you got to keep your eyes open right now for especially your bigger content creators. If you start seeing, because I hadn't even watched, I can just imagine. But if you start seeing them that have either been leaning towards Kohberger's not guilty or at least keeping an open mind, start to put out content and point out things that say, oh, well, it looks like Kohberger may have done this after all. Well, then you probably ought to watch them with one eyebrow up, because that means that the G's contacted more than just Gray Hughes once he watched that video that I put out. People think that I'm crazy and I'm paranoid. Yeah, I'm already prepared for things when they happen. But what did I do? I used my time to my advantage. And there was one particular thing. You talk about using your time to your advantage. I wish it hadn't taken me that much time, but I literally spent, I don't know how many hours trying to be as accurate as I possibly could on a very simple thing. But it turns out it's not that simple in the end. And that is trying to identify accurately the unit locations of all the apartments in the Queen Road apartments. You wouldn't believe how difficult it is to accurately number the units in the Queen Road apartments in the 3 buildings. And going to all of the the sites that are, like for real estate and apartment rental, one thing becomes clear. There's 51 units. That's how many units there are in the 3 buildings for the Queen Road apartments, 51. And another thing becomes clear, because I've gone into city maps, utility maps. I found a lot of new mapping for Moscow. There's some actually pretty neat interactive maps that show you a lot. But none of them will show you the units of the Queen Road apartments. So many hours I've spent, because it is a very, very important thing to identify the units of the Queen Road apartments, I assure you. And as I go on to show you in this video, I think you'll agree with me that knowing what apartments are what is one step closer. We've already solved the case. Make no mistake. But one step closer to proving that we have solved the case. Because in the end, that's going to be the key. Once everybody has enough undeniable information in front of them that they cannot any longer deny it, then the truth will be finally revealed, not before then. Hold on to your hats, folks, because once again, the roller coaster will be making mini loops. Okay, so this is a map that I found on the Moscow website, and it's their city utility map. And you can see they've kind of squared off all the property lines, and they list what the properties are. And I don't know exactly when this aerial photograph was taken, but you can see 1122 was still there, and there's vehicles out in front of it. I don't know if it's the same vehicles that were there when the atrocity took place, but it's interesting when you look at all these vehicles on this map. But what we're focusing on is right here. These are the Queen Road apartments. This larger building here, this building here, and then also this building over here. All three together make up 500 Queen Road. And then it lists like these as 1320, and it doesn't list this one as 1330, even though we know it is. It lists all three of these as 1320. Then you got 1315 over here, 1318 over here. But some things that I have learned about the Queen Road apartments that you may or may not have already known. And that is the fact that these apartments are all 3 stories, but they're kind of weird how they're 3 stories. On this apartment building, there are 2 stories on the back, and there's you know, a upper walkway between the 2 floors. But then when you go to the other side, you'll see the windows on the top 2 stories for these 2 floors. But then there's another bottom floor just on the back side in the walkway here, where it's got apartment units on the bottom that aren't on the back side. So it's 3 stories on this side, but it's only 2 stories on this side. And the apartments don't go to both sides. So it's just, if there's an apartment over here, it goes all the way to the end. And if there's an apartment on the other side, like there is on the bottom, it goes almost all the way to the end over here. And it works almost the same way with this building over here. Or in fact, it works exactly the same way. But the difference is on this side, it's 2 stories instead of 3 like this one, with the walkway in the middle. And then when you go over to the front of it, you'll see the windows on the first 2 stories for these apartments, because they go all the way to the end. And then on the bottom floor over here, there's more apartments that go almost all the way to the end on this side, if that makes sense. And then to my surprise, when I got to this unit over here, I thought there was just the units from the doors on the front, and it was just 2 stories. But it turns out that it works the same way as these buildings. On the back, there's actually another bottom floor down here with 4 more units. So learning that this complex had 51 total units and trying to determine where those units were was a literal nightmare. And if somebody could just show me a schematic that shows all the apartment units, I would probably start crying because of what I had to go through to number these apartments. So what you're seeing right here is the way that I've lined out where these apartments are. This is the first building, showing the first floor and the second floor from the front. And then the top up here are going to be the apartment units on the other side on the bottom floor. Then when you go to the second building, you have all these units on the front, and then up here are going to be the units on the other side on the bottom floor. And I have put numbers by all of these, and my numbers, I believe, are about 95% accurate based on the information I had available to me. These over here, I'm about 99% because I had a little bit more information. But again, these are the units on the front, and then up here are going to be the units on the back on the bottom floors. And there's 51 units in total. Every piece of data I found confirmed there was a total of 51 units. So determining where these 51 units were, the only way I knew to do it was to go through hours and hours of body cam footage to try to locate, through the body cam footage, numbers on doors in different buildings so that I could extrapolate the rest of the numbers from there. And it's very, very difficult to do because most of the buildings, the units do not have numbers, and the ones that do not reflect very well. But I'll show you how I did it. Okay, so when we look at this body cam from Atlanta that was on January 31st of an incident here, it's the best way to be able to see these unit numbers and also be able to see, you know, how many units they are and where they're located. And you can see it's really hard to see these unit numbers. Oh, we just passed it. Hang on. This is the only one we're looking at on the left right here. The only one I could even try to see. Watch as he walks up here. See, it comes into folk, and no, it went too far. You can't see any of those. Hang on. This was driving me crazy, y'all. Okay, it's this one right here. If you catch it just right, you'll see it was number 13. The next we got to see on this side is one of these apartment units on the bottom. And right here we got unit number 2. And as we keep on going, oh, is that one right there? No, you can't see that one. All right, so this is actually the laundry area right here, so that's not even a unit really. But you have to go through this stuff on body cams like this just to be able to see these unit numbers. Now, when we get over here to this other one though, okay, this is the little apartment unit over here. And this one has 8 units on the front. And remember, there's only 51 units in all 3 of these buildings. So number 51's in a weird spot, but then again, they're all in weird spots in this place. Here we go. There you go, number 51. 51. Now, interesting enough, they walk around to the back side of this building, and that's when you can see that there's actually more units back here. So as they come around, there's 1 unit. There'll be 2 in the middle and another one on the end down there, but we get a good idea. That's 46. And the one next to it is 47. That's really important to know. Okay, so extrapolating everything that I can, that makes this building right here have a particular unit, and that unit would be number 43. So we know that one of these units on this building is 43. There's no doubt about that, because we know the lowest number unit we had seen was 46. We know there's 12 units. We've seen this one's 51. That's as high as it goes. So one of these units is 43, and I believe, based on everything that I've looked at, that it's this unit right here, the top floor of the front of the building, unit 43. But it's really important to note that there's no way, based on the numbering system of this apartment complex, that unit 32 could be located in this building right here. And everything that I've looked at tells me that unit 32 should be about right here on the second floor in the second Queen Road apartment building. And that's going to be very important, because one thing that I never could find for sure was what unit number that Showalter lived in. And thanks to a super guilter trying to debunk some stuff, unwittingly, he has led us right down the path to victory, because he had researched it, I guess. Let's find out what unit number Showalter actually lived in.
I've talked to one of the family members, and I just got to tell you, these Proberger, I mean, I don't think there's anything other than to call them as disgusting people. So if you're watching right now and you're one of the people that goes over and watches Jules the dipshit and Embry and the UK guy and the clown, you're an embarrassment yourself. And I'm sorry that if you don't agree, but you just are. You're a joke. Okay, the fact that you give any attention at all to these complete nutjob psychos, it makes you a sick person yourself. All right, you're like it's almost like you are out there, sort of relishing in, just messing up somebody's life. I mean, you guys are sick people. So it says, I applied for and was granted a search warrant for, looks like 500 Queen Road, maybe number 32, the residence of Jack Showalter. The warrant was based off the following information. To include Detective Hugh Powell walked back to 500 Queen Road, maybe number 32.
Now, I know you're thinking to yourself, now, Bob, is this really important? And I assure you, yes, it is. I mean, so important. I can't even begin to describe it to you because of the implications of what we're about to discuss. So, according to Gray Hughes, Showalter's in number 32, which is going to be right here. That's important to note because 32 can't be over here. But we now know through diligent research that Schneider lives in unit 43, which is right here in this building. Very important to distinguish this JS from this JS and the possibilities of the apartment over here belonging to this JS not being possible, which only leaves this JS, which really tells the story. And you can see how I've got these lined out here, just like you see in the city photograph here. But let's move on. Why is that so important? And that's because now that we have new information, we can revisit an old subject. For those of you that remember, I went over this particular police report several weeks back. This is the same police report that super minion Gray Hughes was just reading from. In fact, strangely enough, he went through the reports almost exactly like I did originally and read almost exactly what I had read, except he didn't have the information that we have, and he read it the same way that I read it. Now that we have the new proper information, we can extrapolate the truth of the matter, and wow, what a story it tells us now. In this search warrant for 500 Queen Road, apartment number 43, and I'll prove that even more as we go through this, is about the police report where they took blood swab samples and actually lost several of them. This is the one where they took the 94. But when we go through and we read this document that was written by Brett Payne on December 13th, 2022, sometimes it doesn't seem to have that big of an impact if they write the documents in reverse. Sometimes that really does, though, and this would be one of those times. And you can see that it starts out, and again, this is the narrative. He's telling the story based on these dates. And I say the police reports have to be pretty accurate because they have to reflect other reports that were written. And there were other reports written on these subjects on these dates, so they are reflecting correct dates. But the dates are very interesting, and I think you'll agree when we're done. On November 23rd, 2022, Brett Payne is saying that he applied for and was granted a search warrant for 500 Queen Road, number 43, the residence of Jack Schneider. The warrant was based off the following information. Okay, so the way the report's written, you have to kind of compartmentalize, right? So he's talking about the final point to the warrant, which final point to the report first, which is the warrant that he was granted on November 23rd, 2022. But then we have to go into a timeline before that to see how he got to that warrant. And he says it started on November 15th, 2022 with Officer House and Brett Payne. They responded to 500 Queen Road at approximately 1,000 hours, again on 11/15/2022. And they walked on the common walkway in front of the door to Schneider's apartment and observed the exterior of the door. Now, I know a lot of people say, wait, that common walkway, that's what goes in between the two Queen Road apartments, Pav. And I can understand why you would think that, and that's just weird wording the way he put it in here, but I assure you it's the one that we're talking about, and I'll show you. The area around the door had numerous spots of a dried fluid, which appeared to be rust drops from a metal roof above the apartment's door. These drops were mainly on the wall next to the door frame, not on the frame itself. I observed what appeared to be a different fluid spot on the door, approximately 8 inches up from the bottom of the door, under the doorknob. I also noticed the deadbolt plating was clean, polished silver, and had no dirt on it. I walked away from the door in order to conduct an interview on a possible witness. Officer House and several members of the ISP forensics unit, to include Detective Hugh Powell, walked back to 500 Queen Road, number 43. I met back up with Officer House and Detective Powell a short time later, and they told me they believe the spot of dried fluid on the door displayed similar characteristics to that of dried blood. Namely, Detective Powell stated the spot displayed a cracking texture common when blood dries on a surface. Now, this is where it gets kind of interesting for me, the way that Payne words this, because he says Powell stated that the spot displayed cracking texture common when blood dries on a surface. And he also said that Officer House and Powell went out there and they believed the spot of dried fluid on the door was similar to characteristics of dried blood. But as he's going through this, then all of a sudden his opinion gets interjected, and that's what he thought it was. So Payne thought the spot also displayed a similar drop pattern to the blood spots found on the banister wall and the wall on the stairwell to the ground floor, which I observed inside 1122 King Road. So why would Payne, looking at just a blood drop, associate it, and we're talking about on an apartment 300 and something feet away from the King Road residence, and he's looking at a door with just a simple blood drop. He said down here about 8 inches above the ground. How is he looking at that and in his mind comparing it to what he had seen in the King Road residence on the banister wall and the stairwell to the ground floor? That's a pretty interesting comparison that he's making in his mind, and I wonder if it's for a reason. Because when I go back to that document I read to you the other day, I think it's inadvertently telling us what the unknown male DNA on the banister wall and on the stairwell may have actually belonged to. And remember this document that I read to you where they're going through on the alternative suspects and they're showing how they cleared them based on DNA comparisons to things we never even knew existed, like his Showalter's DNA was not found on the knife sheath strap on which the DNA was found that matched the defendant, or in the DNA mixture on the back of the sheath, the blood mixture on the back of the sheath. Can you believe that? His DNA wasn't in there either. And it didn't match the DNA from the swab taken in Xander Kernodle's bedroom or the DNA under Maddie Mogan's fingernails. And then lab report 13 says Showalter's DNA from samples from the fingernails of all the other victims, as well as swabs taken above the stairwell at the residence, the upper floor banister, and the bottom of the handrail at the scene of the crime. Does that sound familiar? The upper floor banister and the bottom of the handrail at the scene of the crime? So Payne thought it looked similar to blood spots that was found on the banister wall and the wall on the stairwell to the ground floor, which I observed inside 1122 King Road. So he's making a mental comparison of that hard evidence in the King Road residence to a blood spot he sees on the outside of this door. And Officer House also told me he looked at several other doorknobs and deadbolt plates on doors in the same apartment complex, all of which had a fine layer of dust. Officer House also confirmed Schneider's door did not have the same layer of dust as though it had been cleaned off. So they were pretty suspicious about Schneider's door for some reason because of this blood. And it gets even more suspicious to them as time goes on, but let's take a look at a timeline real quick. Okay, so real simple. On November the 13th, we have the atrocity on King Road. On November the 15th, in the police report, Payne says him and Officer House returned to the 500 Queen Road apartments, and they are canvassing and getting statements from witnesses, and they're specifically interested in blood drops that are on the front door of apartment number 43, and they are considering what to do about it on November 15th. They're looking to either follow a lead or exclude it as a lead. That's about the gist of it at this time. Next, he says that he returned to MPD and was notified by Detective Vargas, who was reviewing security camera footage provided by the owners of 1320 Linda Lane, of possible footage of someone walking by the cameras at 3:50 hours on 11/13/22. So 3:50 hours, we know that's gun rack guy. And I love when people want to debate about sounds on Linda Lane and they try to equate gun rack guys gun racking with screams heard at 1:45 a.m. and say that if I don't acknowledge the screams, then I can't acknowledge the gun rack racking. Well, I hate to even ask them to critically think, but when you hear a gun rack and then you see a guy walking towards the King Road residence, well, you see, that's called corroboration. And when you see it in a police report and they're talking about this specific incident, well, then there's triple corroboration. So yeah, I can actually point to that as something legit. But anyways, they got focused in real quick once they seen gun rack guy walking in black towards the King Road residence at 3:50, right during the time they expect the crime is about to start happening. I watched the film with Detective Vargas. The cameras show the parking lot of 1330 Linda Lane, which is situated directly south of 500 Queen Road, number 43. Now, they've only talked about in this entire report 500 Queen Road, number 43. And we can verify exactly where 500 Queen Road, number 43 is based on what he says right here. The cameras show the parking lot of 1330 Linda Lane, which is situated directly south of 500 Queen Road, number 43. It tells us everything and proves it with that statement right there. You see, looking at the key right here, this is north, south, west, and east. And he said that the parking lot of 1330 Linda Lane, where you see gun rack guy walk across right here, is directly south of the apartment unit that they're discussing. 500 Queen Road, number 43. This parking lot is directly south of 500 Queen Road, number 43. So Showalter's unit's number 32, so that means the JS in this document can't be Jack Showalter. It's got to be the only other JS, which we know his apartment number is 43, and that's Jack Schneider. So that's what you call verification of this particular person in this particular report, and that's huge, y'all. Because as we keep reading, it says the frame captures a portion of the 500 Queen Road parking lot in front of 43, but does not capture the apartments themselves. The area of 500 Queen Road, number 43, is also much darker than 1330 Linda Lane. The video is infrared and is thusly displayed in black and white. At approximately 3:50 on 11/13/2022, per the timestamp on the video, a figure clad in dark clothing can be seen walking from the building which houses 500 Queen Road, number 43. The figure walks to the west out of the parking lot and leaves the frame of the video as the figure enters the sidewalk area between the two other apartment buildings at 500 Queen Road. The terminus of this sidewalk is immediately east of 1122 King Road. The figure is not captured by the cameras any further. You can bet once they got video and they identified gun rack guy, just like we did, this became suspect number one in their minds, and they were trying to identify suspect number one, and it got just a little bit more, how can I say, impactful for them to be able to actually go into that apartment and see if there's any more evidence. And we know this based on what they're about to continue to say. Well, he actually uses the words based on. Based off of the information above, MPD and ISP officers served a search warrant on the exterior of the front door to 500 Queen Road, number 43. Now, it does not tell us what date that they served this search warrant on. We can only guess. It's sometime in between 11:15 when they first started, and it wasn't that big of a deal to them, to when they seen this video footage, and they said, we got to look into this further. So sometime between 11:15 and 11:22, they're serving a search warrant. But MPD and ISP officers served a search warrant on the exterior of the front door to 500 Queen Road, number 43. Access to the residence per the search warrant was granted only if a presumptive positive test for blood was found on the exterior door. Nothing was found during this search, and the warrant was returned. So what that means is they went to that blood spot and they sprayed it to see if it tested positive for blood, and it did not. So they went, well, maybe the guy came out of a different apartment, or he didn't come out of an apartment at all, and they moved on in their investigation. And then it's kind of strange, though, because the next thing that we hear on this is on November 23rd, Payne again is going to talk in reverse. MPD officer Morris was contacted by another JS with a much shorter last name, and he is a maintenance worker for, you can bet, 500 Queen Road, which manages 500 Queen Road, number 43. And he told Officer Morris he conducted a routine maintenance order. He just happened to conduct a routine maintenance order, supposedly on 11/22/22. Now, people get on to me and say, how do you know what's the truth and what's not in these documents, Pav? It's all based on your opinions. Give me a freaking break. It's pretty easy to determine when something is probably a little bit fabricated and when something's the truth. And which manages 500 Queen Road, number 43. And they told Officer Morris he conducted a routine maintenance order on 500 Queen Road, number 43, on November 22nd, 2022, wherein he discovered something of note. I'll point out something of note, that it says that he didn't contact the MPD officer Morris until 11/23. So if he did this on 11/22 and discovered something of note, well, then why didn't he call them that day? Why did he wait until the next day to call them if it was something of note? That's how you know that this right here probably never even happened. And if it did happen, it happened when Payne called the maintenance guy, and the maintenance guy went and did it on 11/23 and called Payne back and said, yeah, there is some blood in there. Now, what happened between the time that their presumptive blood test showed that there was no blood and they moved on in the investigation, and the time where all of a sudden they got this maintenance guy just out of the blue calling them and saying they found blood spots? Did anything in this investigation happen in between these two times that would have caused them to have that guy go in there and do that? And I say, yeah, something big happened. But let's look at the timeline. So when we look at the timeline, the way that they have it written out here, like the events took place, it's the atrocity on the 13th. On the 15th, Payne and Officer House go back to 500 Queen Road, and they notice a blood spot on unit number 43. And then they execute a search warrant after Vargas sees gun rack guy on the video. So they go and they get a search warrant, and part of that search warrant is the blood that they noticed on the front door needs to test positive for blood. It did not. So it came back negative, so they moved on. And then just out of nowhere, luckily a maintenance guy happens to go in that apartment and find blood and contacts Payne and them the next day. And then they can get a warrant to go inside the apartment. But did anything happen between the time where their presumptive blood test came back negative and they moved on, and the magic story of the maintenance guy happening to go in there so they could get a warrant to go in? And yeah, I think it did. In between 11/13 and 11/23, something big kind of happened. And not only did something big happen, but something big happened to the guy who is the biological father to the person who lives in apartment number 43. Do you think that's a coincidence? Sorry, folks. There are no coincidences that big. Because remember, autopsy report shows that on November 24th was the reported date, or remember, November 21st was the reported date for Mauitch. And that was the date on November 21st. The FBI received the anonymous call about the guy in Lewiston who was later flown to Spokane. And that's a 39-year-old Nicholas Mauitch. Just happens to be the father of the person who lived in Unit 43. And what happened after they heard all this about the automobile collision? It says Idaho State Police Detective Jace Sweeky contacted Latah County Sheriff's Office, Nez Perce, Lewiston. No collision was reported, but a vehicle registered to Nicholas Mauitch was found abandoned in a field later. Mauitch was found partly clothed and injured while wandering in the streets of Lewiston. This was on November 15th. Mauitch was later med-flighted, and then the medical examiner got involved. And now we got to look at dates, though. I contacted the Spokane County Medical Examiner's office in Spokane, Washington. I spoke to Deputy Medical Examiner or Medical Investigator Blank, and he advised me they did, in fact, have the body of Nicholas Mauitch, and a full autopsy had been performed on November 21st, 2022. And Blank told me that he had contacted Mauitch's mother, who told him that he left the house on November 8th and he was being good for a while. But he requested copies of autopsy photographs so we could see what injuries the anonymous medical staff was calling the FBI about. And he received the requested photographs via email from the medical examiner's office. And the photographs he transferred to compact disc and entered them into evidence at the MPD. He also received a phone call from the medical examiner's office asking if they needed anything further. They requested they do DNA buccal swabs of Mauitch's body. But they told me they would, but an ISP detective would have to take possession of the swabs once they were done. And then I contacted ISP Detective Lehman in the ISP District 1 offices. She drove over to Spokane Medical Examiner's office, picked up the buccal swabs. Detective Lehman then drove the swabs to MPD department and placed them into evidence. And the case continues. But what date did they actually get informed about Mauitch? The autopsy was done on the 21st, and that's when they sent the lead in to the FBI. Well, we know that on November 23rd, 2022 is when Detective Lehman retrieved the DNA swabs collected by the Spokane County Medical Examiner's office from Nicholas Mauitch. And they transported the swabs to the MPD and placed them in their control. So again, they picked up the DNA and got it to MPD on November 23rd, 2022. I'll bet that was something that they couldn't wait to get their hands on, don't you? So let's look at that timeline one more time now, and let's input this information and see if it impacted anything in their investigation. So November 13th, the atrocity. The 15th, Payne notices spots on the house at 500 Queen Road. They see gun rack guy on the video. They execute a search warrant for presumptive blood. It turns out it wasn't blood, so they move on. And then magically on the 22nd, a maintenance guy just happens to check the apartment for blood and find some. But somewhere in between this and this supposedly happened, the Spokane medical examiner contacts the FBI about Mauitch and lets them know, and I'm sure they found out pretty quick that that was the father of Jack Schneider in the number 43 they kept looking at. So I would think that would impact them and have them have a maintenance guy go by and check the apartment for more blood and then have him call in so they can actually get a warrant to enter that apartment, which they did get a warrant to enter that apartment and collect blood samples on November 23rd, which just happens to be the same day they collected the DNA from Mauitch's autopsy to compare those samples to. Do you think they did that? And it's amazing how once you start getting the missing pieces, how the big picture starts to make much more sense. You see, they found out about Mauitch on November 21st, and they started investigating him, and they figured out that his son lived in apartment number 43, which was obviously the apartment gun rack guy was coming out of, walking towards the King Road residence. And then they're looking at blood in the residence. I mean, they're putting two and two together on Mauitch. Well, I'm sure that once Molly and Farley hear that Mauitch is no longer alive, they do what snitches do. And they start trying to talk to law enforcement and help them out in their investigation. Now we know why they had Molly in as a protected informant, as we heard on a body cam of a traffic stop, them list her as a protected informant. And we now know what Farley, the protected informant that worked with the FBI, was likely telling law enforcement. And they were just simply doing what snitches do and giving up somebody that was already passed away in Mauitch. I believe that's pretty much the case now. So now I know who Farley gave up, and now I know who Molly really gave up. And I have to point out that Mauitch passed away on the 23rd. They brought Molly in for questioning the first time on guess what date? November 23rd. And guess what date they picked up Farley and started investigating him? Guess what? Yep, November 23rd. That was their free-for-all day on suspect number one in the case. And I've always told y'all there was more than one suspect in the case. However, I always said it was Kopacka, and Kopacka was passed away. That's why we didn't hear a lot about him. Well, it turns out that Mauitch was passed away as well, so that's why we wouldn't have heard a lot about him in the case. But that means if Mauitch was snitched on after the fact by both Molly and Farley, well, then how the heck did they get to Kopacka? Who snitched him out? I'll be bringing you the details on this very, very soon because I have them now.